welcome to our session. It's so nice to be involved with the Library Publishing Forum again. I'm Jennifer Kemp from Crossref. I'm here with Brian Cody of Scholastica, and we're going to talk today about search, discoverability, and journal article metadata. I'm head of partnerships at Crossref, so I work with members, service providers like Scholastica, and metadata users on best practices to improve community participation, metadata, and discoverability. Brian?
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm Brian Cody, the CEO and co-founder of Scholastica, which is a journal publishing platform used by over 1,000 journals with modular tools for peer review, article production, and open access journal website hosting. Back to you, Jennifer.
Okay, let me share my screen. All right, so I'm going to dive right in with best practices. Since we're here to talk about discoverability today, seemed like a good place to start. So at the risk of stating the obvious, knowing at least generally what's in your metadata and maybe as importantly what's not in your metadata is a really good place to start. If you're unfamiliar with it, there is help. So Crossref Participation Reports is a website anybody can use to look up any Crossref member and get a nice sort of graphical overview of some key elements in the metadata. So that's what you see on the right-hand side of your screen. Of course, we always encourage talking with publishing partners, and that's something I would define very broadly here. I would include downstream users of the metadata as well. And it's something that we see a lot. Organizations understand that, partners work with Crossref on metadata, but are sometimes a little hazy on the specifics. So we do encourage having those conversations. Of course, providing as much metadata as possible is always a goal for that, a goal for us. So we do encourage that. But I will talk about some specifics later if you're looking for something to start to focus on. Knowing why it matters is really useful context. I hear about this all the time. Organizations understand that the metadata gets used, but are, again, sometimes a little bit hazy on the specifics. So I'll give some examples of that. For those who are looking for some concrete resources, Metadata 2020 is a really good place to go. There are high-level principles, best practices, and then use cases to illustrate both. So hopefully you find that useful. And of course, metadata is not a set it and forget it sort of thing. It really has to be maintained over time, and it will change and evolve. So a few years ago, ORCIDs were new to many of us. Now they're more established, and we talk a lot today about things like data citation, but whatever the topic is, it will certainly evolve over time. So we'd like to see organizations, be prepared to take advantage of those opportunities as it comes up. And then having a metadata strategy or including metadata as part of an overall strategic plan and just thinking about it strategically as well as operationally is something that would be very beneficial. So a few news items possibly for some of you. We're talking about journals today, and when we do that, we very reasonably think of article metadata, but title and issue level metadata is an option as well. Crossmark, which is used for things like retractions, used to have a fee associated with it, but it no longer does. So if that was a barrier for you, that's now gone. And abstracts is something else that we talk about a lot, we get asked for a lot, and abstracts in multiple languages are an option as well. And then finally, relationships. So this is connecting metadata outputs in the metadata, and it's used for things like versions and translations. So it's a really nice option. It's something that we've seen a lot more of in the last few years, and we really do encourage. And the reason we encourage that is because it's something that we like to call the research nexus. So that's something that you'll probably hear us talking about more. And it's represented here using articles, but it could certainly be books or a combination of content types. But the idea, of course, is that these outputs are much more than just, the one article that you may see. There's a lot behind it. There's a lot associated with it, and getting a fuller picture of those outputs is really important. And that's something that can be done with those relationships. So we do encourage folks to take a look at that. And then getting back to why this matters. I always say the metadata matters because it gets used so heavily. So we have about 125 million records at this point. They're used by an enormous variety of services throughout scholarly communications. So that's organizations, it's individuals, it's a lot of machine use of the metadata. And so that means that those readers of the metadata are themselves searching, they're querying for it, and then they take it and use it in turn to facilitate, enable search and discovery in their own systems. And really, they want as much metadata as they can get, basically. But of course, we do get asked for specific metadata elements all the time. And I'm not going to go through these in any detail, and they're not in any particular order. But I do want to just touch on this last point, and that's affiliation. So something that's probably close to home for those at universities. We get asked all the time about affiliations for all contributors. So not just the corresponding author, not just the first and last author, but everybody involved in a particular work. If you haven't seen the Research Organization Registry or ROR, that's something that's an option for you now. That can certainly help with affiliations, and something that we hope will be available at Crossref sooner rather than later. But it really just gets back to this idea of linking standalone records together and giving a fuller picture of who's involved in research outputs and getting those all associated together, because when they're more closely linked, that helps facilitate discoverability. So with that, I thank you and turn things over to Brian.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Let me get my screen up. Perfect. So at Scholastica, we work with many campus-based publishers as a platform partner, which means we're helping provide metadata on their behalf to, of course, Crossref, also Google Scholar and other abstract and indexing services, also other web crawlers. So I thought it'd be helpful to share some lessons we've learned around improving article level metadata, as well as search engine optimization best practices. But I do want to emphasize that this is not meant to be read as a laundry list of all the things you have to do, which can be stressful, especially given all the demands in our time, given for a campus-based publishing program. And let's be honest, this has been a hard last 14 months. So we all want to and should be focusing on our emotional well-being. So I don't want to have this feel like a bunch of things you have to do. Rather, let's look at this as from an agile mindset. So think about adapting to change and delivering improvements constantly, rather than only at the end of a big project. So I want us to try and think about how we can make an improvement, get the benefit now, come back and do it again. So we improve your metadata. What's one thing you can improve to send to Crossref, or one thing to improve in your meta tags? And so hopefully that helps us think about this more as a buffet. So you don't go there and sort of load up all 6 plates you're going to eat. Well, I eat 6, maybe you do fewer than that. Hopefully you do. At once, usually you go and get something, enjoy it, get the benefit, then you go back. And so each plate is a win. You don't have to plan it all out. And that also makes it a little easier. It's one of the appeals of buffet. So that's how I want us to think about ways of improving metadata. Okay, so having said that, this list was again based on talking to campus-based publishers, and is really thinking about ease of implementation more than professional thoroughness. So again, for LPForum participants, hopefully there's some ideas here that are actionable and achievable. So let's jump in. The first one is the copyright license. So for many journals, this doesn't change. So, technically it could, but if you think about hard coding this, every article has this little line of text in the HTML or in the XML, you might be good. And this is, having the copyright license is really important for people understanding when and how they can both access and then reuse this. And again, when I think about the fact that for many publishers, for a given journal, 99% of the time, the article is going to have the same license. This could be a really easy win. So here's what it might look like in HTML, very simple line of code where it's saying citation copyright is CC BY 40. And in the JATS, you might have something like this. But again, once you have it, you just keep reusing it for articles. And so it's always the same. So hopefully that is easy in the idea of copyright license, which can feel potentially complicated. once you know what your license is, you can improve your metadata by including it. Okay, the next one is, and there was a little asterisk, if you remember on a few slides ago, this is open references. So if you're already generating references, you can include a note to make them open. And so, for example, in the HTML, you could take that, and this is what a reference looks like. That might be harder. So maybe let's look at the XML. If you already have references, you can actually email Crossref, and they can set them to be open by default. We were working with a publishing partner, and we thought we would need to add a bunch of code for each individual reference. And it turns out Crossref can help you with this. And that helps you contribute to an open corpus of citation network, which is great for thinking about the ways people can use that to discover your content, that whole web that can trace back to your content. Having open references is huge for that. And if you contribute to that ecosystem, other people can contribute as well, which helps with your discoverability. Abstracts. These are something we almost always have with our journal articles. And so including these in the XML or in the metadata that you're giving to Crossref is, I don't know, really big. If you think about, and I think a lot of, if you work with libraries, you're probably very familiar with the richness of metadata going from a title to then a title and abstract is huge. I mean, that's a 5-fold increase. Again, library publishing forum, someone here actually probably knows what the metadata quotient is, so please feel free to tweet that. Here I also have at the top what that might look like in the HTML, but it's pretty easy. I mean, even if you're doing XML and adding anything to that feels stressful because you sort of barely have the XML working, adding abstracts pretty easy. If you're hosting content and you want to think about Google Scholar getting access, it's just a note. If you look at the inclusion guidelines, they note, it's this bottom little sentence, if you don't have these 3 meta tags, they're going to act like you have none. So you might have tons of great metadata. If you don't have the title and the full name of at least the first author and the year of publication, Google Scholar is going to kind of move on. And the full name, it's really something Jennifer said, the full name is really important. Some people have a lot of metadata and they don't include their authors, again, especially at least the first author. So make sure those are in there. So if you want to look at your HTML, you should see this: citation underscore title, citation underscore author, citation publication date with 2 underscores. You can see where they are. Last sort of one is if you're already producing XML to send to Crossref with your metadata, DOAJ says that you can actually deposit that same XML into DOAJ. So in the way that Crossref is this warehouse for discovery services to come find metadata and then package it up in all sorts of interesting ways, DOAJ can be a version of that. And they could have the exact same sort of data symmetry that you have with Crossref. I'll note that I haven't done this. We work with DOAJ's API directly, but if you are working with Crossref, getting your metadata in more places is probably good, and it should be easy if you can use the exact same file. So those are the 5 hopefully low-hanging fruit sort of options. And again, I want us to think about between what Jennifer talked about and what I talked about, not as, again, a laundry list, but as that buffet. Find something that seemed like, oh, we could do that. That would be a nice improvement. And if that's all you get from this, great. So that rather than thinking we're only at 70% complete, think, well, we used to be at 60. So isn't that wonderful how we've improved? So with that, Jennifer and I are going to move on to the live recording. I'm sorry, the live Q&A now, and hopefully we have some great answers for you. All right, thank you.